What's up, everybody? In this video I'm going to show you useState and specifically try to show it to you in a way where you can master it in as little time as possible. And it shouldn't be too hard because it's the most fundamental hook in React, and it's extremely useful for so many use cases. So let's get right into it. I basically created a new React project and just gutted out the app, and that's about all I've done. So the first thing that's worth noting is useState is from React. So what that means is we have to import it from React. Now, React is the main export. This is actually a normal export, and it's called useState. And the idea behind useState is you're able to hold a value, and at any given moment, that state is the truth of that value. That value is that. Now what happens is when you change the state, this entire function will rerun, and that state will now be the updated version. So I'll show you exactly what that means. So the first thing I want to show you is if I say const, and I make an array here, and then I say A and B, and then I set it equal to an array of 1 and 2. And then if I console log A and B, if I press F12, you'll see 1, 2. Now the reason that this happens is because if the right side is an array and you're assigning it, you could say this array, and then you could say array 0 and array 1. This will do the exact same thing. It'll also do 1, 2. But what's cool about JavaScript nowadays is you can actually deconstruct arrays. And so that's what useState is doing actually. It's a function that is returning an array. So when you see people do this state and set state, that's actually what's going on. So now what we'll do is we'll go ahead and use the hook. And it takes one argument maximum, and it's called the initial value. So whatever you set this to is what the state's going to be initially. So we'll go with the string dog, and so we'll say state here. And now if we console log state, what's happening is it's returning an array where at the index 0 it's dog. So just the same way, if I make this array 0, you'll see boom, still prints out dog because the first value of this array is dog. So we'll go back to putting it as state. So the first item is state. So state dog. Okay. Now what we'll do is we'll add a set function. So that's what the second thing of this array returns. So imagine if I made a function called use whatever, right? And then I'm returning an array. That's what's happening here. Now you can also imagine that there's a function in here. So let's say let state. So and then this state is the value that we're returning back into this component in a way. And then we can create a function called setState, and that sets the state to whatever you pass in here, new value, and then we can say new value. So what's happening here is we're creating a variable, and then when we call this function, it's going to come in here and set state to the new value, and then state will be there. That's not exactly, because React has some special things, but that's basically what's going on with this useState. So now what we can do is go ahead and get the set state out of it. And that's just a naming convention. You can call it anything. Sometimes I actually name it based on what it's actually doing. So for example, I could have grades and then set the grades. That's a bad example. But sometimes I have it as update grades, and then I'll create something called const set grades. And what this does is basically does update grades. So now set grade is the same as this update grades. The difference is now I can also do extra logic in here. So I could do a whole bunch of different logic and then update state. So I can do more things in one, and that's maybe a reason you'd update it. But my whole point in doing all of that was to explain that this can be named whatever you want and it will still work. So for the time being, we're going to use this, and what we're going to do is we're going to say, so we're going to console log state. We're going to console log state, and then what we're going to do is we're going to add a button that says change state, and then we'll create a function called change state. And what this is going to do is it's going to change it to cat. So it's going to use the setter. It takes that argument in, and it's going to update this value. So this takes in a value and updates this value. And then we can close this, and then we can add an on click to this button that does change state. So now when I click change state, you'll see it actually goes from dog to cat. Now if I click change state again, it's just going to stay cat because, well, if we change cat to cat, it's cat. Now you'll notice what happens when this happens. When this function is ran, which we're going to rename now to set state, when this function is ran, this whole function reruns again. So that's why this is console logging again. What we can do here is we can also just say state in here. So now it says dog up here, change state, cat. So what's happening is this initially, if I refresh here, it runs through this function. We initially set state to be dog, state gets console logged, state gets put down here. Now when we click this button, it runs this function, which then runs set state to cat, and then what happens is it runs this whole component back over again. The only thing it doesn't do is this part right here, because that was the initial value. So when you change the state, actually it's stateful. It remembers and it will react to what you do when you call set state. And so that is why basically state is going to be different on the next go around, because we said set state to this, and now the state is now cat, cat, cat. Now the next thing we can do is we can say state is a number. Let's say it's 0, and then we want this button to make it increment 1. So we'll say state plus 1. So if state is 0, then when we run this function, it's going to take 0 and then add 1 to it, and so it's going to become 1. So if we go ahead and save that, we click change state, it goes up 1. If we click it again, it goes to 2. If we click it again, it goes to 3. So now what happens every time we click this button, it takes the value it's at and adds 1. Now this is what's interesting about this use state hook, is that, and specifically this function set state, is it actually is able to accept a value that you're going to set the new state to, but it also can be a callback function. So an arrow function with nothing in it. And this argument will automatically already be the current state. So often you'll see people say cur. So whatever value this is going to be stored in here. So what that means is now if we say return, so what you return from this is what you're setting the new state. You have the initial state, and then what you return is the new state. So if we say this is 0, and then we say 0 plus 1, actually what you'll find is if we refresh this, it has the exact same effect. It still works the exact same. So now you might be wondering, why would you even want to do this? Well, I will tell you why. There's sometimes, okay, actually I'll show you. So if we do set state plus 1, and we do this twice, watch what happens. You ready? It only went up once. The reason it went up once is because when we click the button, it runs this function, which then says, okay, state is 0. State is 0, let's add 1 to it. And then we set that state to 1. So now the state would be 1. Now when we go to this line, we come here and it says state's 0. So 0 plus 1 is 1. So actually, both of these are setting it to 1, because what hasn't happened yet is the re-render. So this function has to run all the way through before the state actually changes. So what I'm saying is we set state from 0, 0 plus 1 is 1. Then we run this, 0 plus 1 is 1. And then it restarts all over again and then says, okay, state's now 1. And so if we ran this again, it would say 1 plus 1, and then 1 plus 1 would just set it to 2. So now you see, this is why this is a thing, this arrow function. So if we return the current value, this current value actually updates instantly, unlike this one. This one updates after a re-render. This one updates instantly. So what I'm saying is, if we do cur here, cur plus 1, it's going to update. It's going to set the current, which is 0 at first, then to 1, and then it's going to come here and say, okay, the current's 1, and add 1 to it. So now it'll actually increment by 2. See that? So that's the purpose of this, is if you need to actually see the actual value of state, you need to get it from this function, this argument of this function that this state takes as a parameter. And then this one, and in most cases you can get away with state plus 1, because usually you don't have to do things like twice. But it's really important to know. So this is basically how state works. When you call this function, it will rerun your entire component, and this value will be updated. What you put here will be the initial value. Now, we can go crazy with this, because this can be an array. This can be an object. It can be anything. So if we said that, let's say the initial state is an array 1, 2, 3. Then what we can do is we can say, when we change state, we'll say set state to be the current state it is. And then what we want to do is say we want to create a new array that is all of the same values as it was before, but then we want to add another value, and that other value is going to be the cur.length plus 1. So what that means is right now the length is 3, so 3 plus 1 is 4. So this number would be 4. And so we're going to say keep the 1, 2, 3, but then add 4. And then keep the 1, 2, 3, 4, then add 5. So that's what's going to happen now. So if I click change state, you'll see it starts adding these numbers just like that. And you can see all of that state changing. So that's another example. Another example is an object. So we could have an object here with a name and age. So what does that say? Age 30, too many. Okay. And then what we can say is we're going to set the current to be the same as it was, but let's say this is it was your birthday function. So what this is going to do is it's going to, let's make this a new line so we can see what's going on here. Boom. So we're going to say, okay, take the current state and keep that object the exact same, but then go to the age and then take the cur.age and add 1 to it. And now it doesn't, it's mad because we're trying to render an object. So what we can do is we can say state.name and then state.age. And then we're no longer rendering an object. Now we're rendering name and age. So now if I click change state, it's incrementing the birthday, but not the name. So there's all sorts of manipulation you can do. And this is extremely important hook for saving what's going on in your app. Then you can do whatever, and then you can change things, and those things will reflect and re-render your component, so they'll change what's in the JSX. So I kind of feel like this was a terrible tutorial, but that's okay because I'm new to this. And if you have any questions or none of that made sense, then definitely reach out in the comments and we'll take it to the next level. But for now, I appreciate your time. I can't wait to build these huge projects with you guys. I have the opportunity to have a team of developers I work with as a leader, and we're creating the next generation of amazing applications using React. So this is why I'm here. Only going to get better, and I can't wait to hear from you guys. Peace.